I was sitting here thinking, as I was listening to the governor's remarks, that maybe it might just be confusing to people, quote unquote, when we reference the Tea Party. Tomorrow, the Tea Party is not a political party, but a political movement that didn't, in fact, even exist 2 years ago. And you referenced fringes of it, but I think it's an unorganized group whose primary goals have really been less to end the federal deficit spending, reduce taxes, less government regulation, and thus the reference to Tea Party, the founding of our country. But tomorrow, and it just seems natural to them that the Republicans are closer to their thinking, this grassroots of less government, than Democrats are, but it would be wrong to think that the Tea Party and the Republican Party were synonymous. A lot of Tea Party members, and they are very loosely organized, have put the Republicans on notice, as the governor has said. So we would see whether they become disenchanted with what the Republicans do after they put them in office. But Sal Russo is going to speak to this tomorrow when we have a panel about the rise of conservatism around the world and the response from the left. And Sal has worked with the Tea Party, and we will learn a little bit more about what that is. But the Tea Party is not a political party, but actually a spontaneous movement that many dismissed, and a lot of exit polling showed is something that both parties have to pay close attention to. So to speak to us from the Republican point of view about the midterm elections is Mr. Brad O'Leary. Brad has graciously not only agreed to be here, but provided the data that you have here. And I think that his many years working with the party at so many different levels and raising money for the party, I think he's seen the trends come and go, and perhaps is ideally suited to analyze, at least from the right point of view, what these elections were all about. So Brad, I turn it over to you.
First, the governor said that I would speak about the many mistakes that the Democrats made in this last election. I want him to carry home the word, they made no mistakes. And I, for one, would be delighted if they ran the presidential election exactly the way they ran the off-year election. There were a lot of things that happened in this election. I passed out two things. I'm not going to go through them, but one is an analysis of the polling that we started taking in January. And I do my polling with John Zogby, who is a very liberal pollster. I am very right-wing, so I do this with John so that he can stop me from asking questions that are so loaded that anyone would answer yes to it. So we try to come up with some meaningful questions. Early in the year, in January, we also started to poll what Tea Party people believe and what young people believe. So it's one thing to say young people voted one way because not enough of them turned out, but if you look at the polling data or study it, you'll see the Tea Party people, young people, a lot of people back in January had already made positions, opinions. And the White House evidently wanted to ignore them because they were looking at other polling or thinking things were going to change. Now, in America, we have three national elections that you should pay attention to. One is a presidential election, which occurs every 4 years. One is a congressional election, which occurs every 2 years. But one is a redistricting election, which occurs every 10 years. The next redistricting election that will occur will be in 2020 during the next presidential election. Now, the election that just took place, 2010, was a redistricting election. This means that all of the congressional districts will be redistricted by the state. This means that state Senate and state House seats will be redistricted by those people who won state Senate and state House seat. This is extraordinarily important because of what happened. There's an argument about, was it a tide, was it a tsunami, exactly what happened. When I look at it, I look at what happened in governor's races and in Senate races as a tide. There's a certain coming home to a Republican base. We have 17 new governors. We won the gubernatorial races. In the Senate, we picked up 6 new senators. We didn't lose a one. So there'll be a 65-vote balance in the House of Representatives. And Democrats, in my memory, this is the first time they've had less than 200 congressmen who are serving in the Congress. This means Republicans control all the committees. This means there'll be a lot of hearings on these people appointed by Obama called czars that before January have never been asked to come before Congress and explain exactly what they're doing, what they're spending, and what's going on. It's a big vulnerability for the White House, especially looking at everything the White House has been able to do in the last 2 years with no oversight by Congress. But the biggest thing that happened, the most stunning thing that happened in this election was a tsunami. In 1994, 468 state House and state Senate members lost their seats to Republicans. In that election, 4 houses that were controlled in the state level by Democrats switched. In this election, almost 692 Democrats lost their seats in the state legislature, and almost 700 Republicans took over those state seats. Right now, 19 houses that were controlled by the Democrats are now controlled by the Republicans, with 2-3 more houses, depending upon 22 races that are still undecided, that could still switch to Republicans. That's a tsunami. That is an enormous tsunami, and that means that these people who've been elected are going to refill the districts in the Congress of the United States. There are 12 seats that were too close to call on Election Day. All 12 of those seats will likely be redistricted, so all 12 of those seats will fall to Republicans come the next election, simply because the power to take precincts out of a seat, put precincts in a seat, are now mainly in the hands of Republicans. I think Democrats control 52 redistricting, the ability to redistrict 52 congressional seats. Republicans control the ability to redistrict 159 or 160 seats. The rest are up to either bipartisan committees, perhaps in Florida, California and New York, or the mixture of the houses are such that there's got to be a little give and take on both sides. Now that's a tsunami. One of the problems for Republicans is they're going to have to defend 800 freshmen. That's a lot of freshmen in the next election. You can't win them all. And winning 800 seats mean they're going to have to do a better job at raising money and a better job at organizing to hold on to those seats in a presidential election. What went wrong for the Democrats? You may have heard stories from the Democratic side about what went wrong, but the 10 things I see that went wrong is, 1, there was no national message on the part of the Democratic Party. 2, there was voter anger that they completely ignored and didn't think of how to bank it down. And if you look at some of these polls, the polls will show you just how angry people were starting in January of this year. 3, there was sustained high unemployment, and it didn't seem as if we were doing anything about it. It was 7.7 when Obama came in. He promised it would never go over 8, and he never justified why it went to almost 10. Now, you can't tell the American people that You can't say I'm going to keep it at under 8 and have it go to 10 and never justify why it went to 10 other than blame it on Bush and not pay a price on election day. The left wing was missing in fundraising. Now, when you look at the fundraising numbers, and a lot of them are in those reports we did, the Democrats spent $1.6 billion. Republicans spent $1.7 billion. It was about even once you counted labor unions. If the Democratic left wing of those big organizations had been allowed to exist and raise money, Republicans would have been seriously outraged. Why didn't they? Because in the presidential election, Obama told Soros and everyone else who had the ability to do that, I don't want money raised by you and spent in the election. We have enough money. We want to control the message, and we look at you, who we cannot communicate with, as being a danger to our winning this presidency, so don't get involved. They didn't get involved in the latter part of 2008. They didn't get involved in 2010 because the White House didn't want them involved. I suspect no matter what the White House wants in the next 2 years, they're going to get involved. The next problem that existed was the Tea Party. When Rick Santelli in January of this year said, let's sow some derivatives in the Lake Michigan, that started the Tea Parties. No one, Republican or Democrat, understood what that meant. No one understood the phenomena of the Tea Parties that built since then. For those of you who aren't British, throwing derivatives in Lake Michigan is similar to in Boston, where we threw tea that arrived in Boston during colonial times that we were forced to pay a tax on. We didn't want to pay a tax on it, so a bunch of colonialists dressed up as Indians went aboard the freighters carrying the tea and threw it overboard. So the term Tea Party is made after people who were throwing tea that the British were trying to bring in and tax the American colonialists for. Now, this Tea Party movement can go in any direction, and we don't know how it's going to go yet. This election, it didn't start a third party, which it could have, except in a couple of places. And in one place, at least, the third party, Tea Party candidate cost a Republican from winning an election, and that was a congressional seat in New York. What happens in the next 2 years? Do they decide to have a third party of their own, or do they continue the direction that they moved in this time? Do they decide they're going to take control of the grassroots of the Republican Party and throw out the guys they don't want in primaries and then be with the Republican Party in general elections? I suspect the success they've had in doing that this year means that's what's going to happen carrying on.